When you throw supervision and safety features out the window and focus only on speed and human judgment, things are bound to go very wrong. And that's exactly what happened in the 70s in Vernon, New Jersey.
I enter the tunnel and you just hear people, oh no, ahead of you, oh no, 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 no. So you're like, what?
Because of situations like these, Action Park became known as the most dangerous theme park in the world. It got so bad that its failures helped reshape safety standards across America. Action Park was founded by Jean Mulvihill in 1978 with an aim to redefine the traditional amusement park experience. The park was divided into 3 major sections: Alpine Center, Motor World, and Water World. Each emphasized physical engagement. You weren't a passive guest, you were part of the machinery. Okay, on paper, this approach was innovative, sure, but in reality, it was frickin' chaotic. When guests control speed, direction, and behavior, variability multiplies fast. Modern ride design assumes that people will make mistakes. Action Park assumed that they would not. One of the park's most famous attractions was the Alpine Slide. Riders sat on a small wheeled sled and traveled down a long concrete track carved into the hillside. A handbrake allowed them to control speed. Okay, the concept itself, it wasn't new, except for the fact that it operated with minimal protective barriers and very little instruction. As a result, riders frequently misjudged braking distance, leaned too sharply into turns, or accelerated beyond safe limits.
Dangerous ride, probably from sheer amount of injuries, would be the Alpine Slide.
It had a stick, and ostensibly, you're supposed to be able to pull up on a stick as a brake, push down on it to go faster. But one thing that I learned was very true. These sleds were often broken.
I didn't know it at the time, but the Alpine Slide was made of fiberglass, concrete, and mostly asbestos.
Cement track, it's summertime, people are in bathing suits, and they're flying down this path at full speed ahead, and they would just tumble off.
You'd go up into this lip, and if you didn't know how to distribute your weight when you came out of that bank turn, the thing would flip on you. And when the thing flipped on you, that's when it started to hurt.
Honestly, what else could they have expected from a wild ride like this one, right? Ejections were common, friction burns from sliding across exposed concrete were frequent enough to earn their own nickname among staff. The big issue wasn't the ride itself, but the fact that it was dependent on the rider's judgment. I mean, yeah, there were a few redundant safety systems, but no automatic braking mechanisms and limited guardrails, not to mention the hard surfaces everywhere. See, in modern parks, designers build around human error. They limit maximum speed, soften impact zones, and introduce fail-safe mechanisms. But at Action Park, the rider's conscience and control were all that stood between life and death, and that is rarely a sustainable model. Like this ride, there was another failure of a slide in Action Park's Water World. A looping water slide that would allow riders to slide through an enclosed tube and complete a vertical loop before exiting into a splash pool. That concept sounded groundbreaking. But once again, the execution was deeply flawed. They failed to consider that the circular motion requires careful calculation of velocity and force. If a rider enters into a loop too slowly, gravity pulls them downward before completing the rotation. Too fast, and forces spike, increasing the risk of injury. Reports later indicated that early testing involved sending dummies down the slide. There were accounts of injuries during testing phases. The ride opened briefly to the public and then closed soon after.
Climb to the top of a series of stairs, and you would ride down the enclosed tube, and at the very end, the tube would go into a huge loop.
And you're supposed to go down feet first with your arms and legs crossed.
And then as soon as you kind of scoop forward, and it just takes you. All of a sudden you're going really, really fast. Oh my God, I'm shitting my pants. It was absolutely terrifying.
Aside from the water slide, the wave pool became one of the most popular attractions. The ultimate showstoppers included powerful artificial waves generated by large mechanical systems, drawing crowds seeking a beach experience in the mountains of New Jersey. But wave pools are complex environments. They combine moving water, varying swimmer ability, and limited visibility beneath the surface. And why did the wave pool not work for Action Park? Overcrowding. A A wave pool can be safe when capacity is tightly controlled and staffing ratios are strictly enforced, but that wasn't the case with Action Park. The lifeguards were reportedly stretched thin. Swimmers who overestimated their abilities found themselves in distress when strong waves rolled through, resulting in multiple drownings. The real issue wasn't the waves, it was how the park was run. At Action Park, systems were less formalized. As attendance grew, the infrastructure struggled to scale with it. And that wasn't the only problem. There was also Motor World as well. It allowed guests to drive go-karts and other motorized vehicles with relatively high levels of autonomy. I mean, sounds pretty awesome, right? But there were no speed sensors installed on the rides, no shock-absorbing barriers, no proper operators to monitor the situation, and no clear enforcement of age and height restrictions.
Flawed because the Grand Prix cars were right next to the beer tent.
So at 5 o'clock, guys would come up, they'd get a bunch of beers in them, they'd go down in Motor World to drive the cars.
Out of all the rides, my opinion, that's the craziest one because it's not the ride attendant's fault. You know, you can't always tell if someone's been drinking, and if you didn't stink like booze, they would never know.
Occasionally with the Lola cars, we would get a guest that instead of following the course would decide he wanted to make his own course, that he would just start driving around on the course, drive off the course.
I'd heard the employees figured out how to override the speed governor so that the go-karts could go as fast as 50 or 60 miles.
So the result was clear. Collisions were bound to happen because of inconsistent supervision. Multiple reports suggested that operational discipline didn't consistently match the ride's risk levels either. Another factor that shaped the park's history was staffing. Action Park relied heavily on seasonal teenage employees, which is pretty common across the industry. But structured training and certification programs are usually critical in high-stake environments like this one. Modern parks invest heavily in staff preparation. Operators complete documented ride-specific training. Lifeguards undergo standardized aquatic certification. Emergency drills are even rehearsed. At Action Park, training processes were less formal. Incident response systems were not as standardized as they are today. Throughout its operation, Action Park faced numerous lawsuits. Injury claims accumulated. Insurance premiums reportedly increased significantly over time. Legal scrutiny forced closer examination of ride design and operational practices. But financial strain pretty soon followed. By the middle of the 1990s, the pressure was building. The financial problems tied to Eugene's other business deals were getting harder and harder to ignore. And then, in 1996, Action Park finally shut its gates. For many people, it felt like the end of something wild and unforgettable. But even though the park closed, its impact, it didn't disappear. See, Action Park existed during a time when amusement park rules in the United States were still taking shape. Safety oversight mostly depended on individual states, and the federal government had only a very small role. Unfortunately, this meant that standards could deviate widely from safety. As the years passed, serious accidents across the industry, including those at Action Park, prompted the governing body to reconsider the safety rules in place at parks. What followed was a more serious effort to set ground rules for the park, replacing the loose oversight with stricter conditions. Groups like ASTM International created clearer and more detailed guidelines for how rides should be designed and built. Inspections became more regular and more organized. Insurance companies started demanding higher safety standards before offering coverage. At the same time, engineering technology improved. Designers could test ideas using better computer models and study how materials would handle stress long before a ride was ever built. Action Park's legacy is complicated. A park that didn't just push boundaries, it ignored them. For some former visitors, it was unforgettable fun. For others, it was a source of injury and tragedy. It left countless lessons for the government. It might be gone, but in many ways, its story helped shape the safer parks that we see today. While it wasn't the sole catalyst for reform, it did become a widely cited example of what can happen when innovation moves ahead of structure. And those lessons continue to shape how modern theme parks design, test, staff, and operate attractions today.